Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. Today we've got Erik Woods from Cinematic Sound Radio on the show. We have a great time talking about science fiction film scores, so we hope you enjoy this. Check out cinematicsound.net for more of Erik's work. Next week we've got John Scalzi, the one and only on the show, so join us for that one. All right, Erik's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Happy to have Erik Woods with us today from Cinematic Sound Radio. We highly recommend checking out cinematicsound.net, and you're going to be bombarded with the best of science fiction scores. Erik runs many shows, from the flagship show to obscure scores to anime spectacular, soundtrack alley. There's many, and Erik has done a fantastic job at streamlining cinematic scores for all of us fans. Today we're going to mainly talk about science fiction scores. We'll probably dabble a little bit into some fantasy, but Erik knows a lot about scores, and his opinions are spot on from what I can tell. And he's just celebrating recently, or a few weeks back, John Williams' birthday, and obviously John Williams is huge when it comes to cinematic scores, especially in science fiction. So we'll probably talk about that. But Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun, and also talking to local people.
Yeah,
this is quite unique. I mean, I'm on another show here in town occasionally, and if you ever get a chance to listen to that, it's called Visions in Sound. And Rob Daniels, who does the obscure score show for me, he hosts that. So it's 98.5 CKWR, and but it's just great that it's we're kind of this little community here, and we're a little close, and we can all kind of talk together, and hopefully one day we get to meet face to face. Yeah.
Yep. Beers and pinball. I don't know if you ever play pinball. We
suck at it, but I like beers.
Oh, we suck at pinball too, but it's fun nonetheless. So, first of all, Erik, I would love to know a little more detail about how you got into scores and radio, because I've heard of a fantastic story about around 1999 when Phantom Menace came out, and that was an exciting time for me when I was younger, where that movie was supposed to change my life, and it changed it in the opposite way I thought it would. But tell us about how this started. And
Sure. I mean, I've been a fan of movies, ever since I was a kid. One of the first memories I do have was seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark with my mother on a sick day, and that just kind of my eyes opened up, and hearing the score as well. And to this day, Raiders of the Lost Ark and the score still remains my favorite of all time. The first movie I ever saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi. I saw the Star Wars trilogy backwards. So I had no idea what was going on, but it blew my mind. I saw it at one of these giant theaters in Toronto. I think it was one of the university theaters, 2 levels, big red curtain covering the screen. And it was just a magical experience. But the music just exploded off the screen. And, I went home and I'm singing the Star Wars theme and drawing TIE fighters and X-Wing fighters. And so I always enjoyed the music from the movies. And I used to tape the music off the TV if I got a chance, because I didn't know you could buy soundtracks. I had no idea. I had no money anyway. But anytime I saw the end credits, it's like, quiet family, I've got to record this, because I just needed it clean. I'm using an old tape deck. It was in mono. It sounded like crap anyway. But that's how I made my mixtapes, and that's how I discovered film music. And then I did a project in high school on John Williams, and then I went to the library and saw that you can actually listen to the music on CD and cassettes, and that just opened me up to this whole world of film music. And so it's 25 years later. I've got more than enough music in my library, everything that I ever wanted to hear. It's right behind me. I know this is radio, but I got a gigantic collection, and I'm just so happy to have it all. But back in 1999, and that was a unique experience. And if you have the time, I'll go through the story. I'll try to be quick, but it was so unique to me because I don't know why it happened to me. So it was about a week before the release of the film. And I used to get, well, I still do. I get promos from the record labels. So I was expecting just to get the radio single of Duel of the Fates, which everybody was getting. I knew everybody was getting that to play it on the radio. And I think it premiered on Much Music here in Canada for the very first time. Blown away. So I knew I was going to get the album, or at least the single. So I got a package. I opened it up. It was the single, but it was also the completed album. And I thought they must have made a mistake. And so I called my rep at Sony Classical and I said, you guys sent me the album. Thank you very much. It's great. Are you okay if I play it on the show this week? And they're, yeah, we sent it to you so you can play it on your show.
Holy
and what's so special about that is that becomes the world broadcast premiere of the Phantom Menace. And that's on my little college radio station in Mohawk College in Hamilton. The FM signal wasn't strong. Neither was the streaming platform. It could hold only a certain amount of listeners at once. So backtrack a couple of days before it happened, Film Score Monthly, their message board, got wind of it, and so did the Force.net, which was the biggest like Star Wars webpage out there at the time. And they said, Eric Woods is going to play the Phantom Menace on the show. So I arrive at the station that Saturday morning, and the guy who's on before me is like, people are just calling, asking for you. They're wondering what's going on. Like, are you playing Star Wars? Are you playing this and that? And so I was about a half an hour before my show is on, and I'm getting calls from Germany, Philippines, England, Florida, wherever. It was just all, where is it going to be on soon? It's going to be on soon. I'm like, yeah, I'll be on at noon my time. So I play the album. I play the whole thing. Again, not knowing what is happening in the background. The server for the entire college hemorrhaged because of 3,000 to 4,000 people tried to get in to listen to the show at once. And the internet server said, forget it. I'm not playing this game anymore. And so just shut down. But thank goodness college, wasn't in session at that time. It's summer break, or else there'd be hell to pay. And it was down for 3 days. And I got a wonderful note from my station manager, and he's like, what happened? What were you doing? And I said, I played the world premiere of the Phantom Menace. He's like, I see. So yeah, there was an email chain, a very angry radio guy and a very angry IT dude. But Andy Posthumous, my station manager, just says, well, I mean, this is just to showcase that we're playing stuff that people actually want to listen to. And so it's actually turned out to be one of his favorite stories in radio of all time. And he'd been in radio forever, and he still loves that story. And he tells it all the time. So that was pretty significant. And again, I was trying to figure out why in the world did I get it? But Andy told me, he's like, you do a good show. And they realized that, this is going to help us. It'll help us promote. I mean, it didn't need any promotion, but it's like, who could we send this to make sure we get the most ears, listening to it. And of course, everything shut down after 10 minutes, but yeah, it was an honor. And it was like one of the greatest moments I ever had at the college in my 10 years when I was there.
Fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
That was a very, I remember that time very well, 1999, and that movie coming out in May. And Duel of the Fates was huge for some reason. For a film score, that was huge. It was the first time Star Wars had like a big orchestra or a big choir, I guess, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's I was actually flabbergasted to see a music video made for it. I was just blown away that it was played on Much Music. It was played on normal radio, like rock stations were playing Duel of the Fates. I mean, that's how big Star Wars, I could say was, but still is. But at that point, again, we had no idea after Return of the Jedi that we'd be seeing another one of these. And so, the hype was incredible. But yeah, then there's the whole letdown. But, coming out of that, John Williams just wrote a classic score. I think it's one of the best in the Star Wars lexicon. And, but yeah, I'm just glad that I'm sort of, associated with that in some sort of small way with the little story from the college.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. Like at the time, there was this huge Star Wars drought, and everything Star Wars seemed electric. And I even remember trying really hard to like the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
Circling. Like I went back and watched it again, and but so you hear kind of an example of kind of a crappy movie, but a great score. So what made it a great score in your opinion? What is there things that we cues that we can look for and appreciate?
There's something about Star Wars that, I mean, there seems to be a Star Wars musical DNA or blueprint. And I mean, it's all changed with the Mandalorian and Boba Fett. It's all just kind of like done a complete 180, and Ludwig Göransson has just taken it to, different places. But when you're thinking about the Skywalker films and even Rogue One and Solo and all the other films as well. I mean, even those 2 Ewok movies, and a couple of other projects, it was always this grand, melodic, tonal, orchestral score written in that kind of 19th century romantic idiom, where everything is just big and melodic, leitmotivic, associating themes with persons, places, and things. And that's what John Williams brought to Star Wars. So every character, with the exception of Han Solo, until the last Han movie, had their own theme. And so that's what really made Star Wars memorable. I mean, it was instantaneous. You saw that title crawl, and boom, there's Luke Skywalker's theme right away, and you'll know it forever. And it was also, I mean, the film just received, the music got a great mix in the movie. So it was just so upfront and forward, and people just latched onto that. And it was really something that wasn't being written at that time. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, you're working on more kind of avant-garde music, some real jazz is super popular. There's a lot of weird stuff that's coming out, some more modern sensibilities, a lot of electronics. But George Lucas's first instinct for Star Wars was to do away with electronics or concrete music, like some of that weird stuff, and just do something that felt like those old swashbuckling film scores, like The Adventures of Robin Hood or The Seahawk, or the stuff they used to hear in those, those B Saturday afternoon matinee serials that they used to watch. And everything's just so exciting and overly done and really expressive. And so Star Wars that's what it's pretty much based on. And so the Phantom Menace, for me, out of the entire prequel scores, although a lot would say that they prefer Revenge of the Sith, but I think that the Phantom Menace really followed that musical blueprint as closely as possible to the original trilogy. There are so many themes and so many. I mean, one thing that John Williams is really known for is even creating these little concert suites that just kind of stand on their own, like the Imperial March, Princess Leia's theme, Ewoks. All those have their own little concert suites that he can then take and play in the concert hall. And he did that with, I think, about 4 or 5 themes from the Phantom Menace. So the Flag Parade, Jar Jar Binks, Duel of the Fates. Anakin's theme, and there's another one in there somewhere. But I mean, that's what Star Wars was all about 3 or 4 brand new themes that would combine with all the ones that you already know. Now, with Attack of the Clones, there really was only one new theme, which is the love theme. Same thing for Revenge of the Sith, which was the Battle of the Heroes, which is essentially just an action track. So he kind of got away from that thematic, or creating those new thematic pieces as he went along for the prequel trilogy. But that's what I love about Phantom Menace. It's so full of melody and so full of excitement, great orchestrations, and of course the introduction of the choir, which was quite unique. But if you go back a few years, Joel McNeely wrote a score to a Star Wars book called Shadows of the Empire. Really, really neat. Now, he wrote it in about 2 weeks. He said he would love to have more time working on it, but he only had about 2 weeks to get it done. But it is this grand, epic Star Wars score, written in the kind of the John Williams style. But that is one of the very first Star Wars scores that has a full choir. Now, there's choir in Empire a bit, and there's a choir for the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, but nothing like that big Duel of the Fates type of choir. So one of the first times we really hear that in Star Wars is Shadows of the Empire. And if you've never heard it, check it out. It's really amazing. But that's what I love about the prequels, and especially the Phantom Menace. Just, that sticking to the John Williams Star Wars musical blueprint. And that's what I love in my Star Wars music.
Ever wondered what it takes to make it in the movie business? Peel back the curtain with 4-6 Success Filmmaking. 4-6 Success Filmmaking is where filmmakers share their stories and the secrets.
It's beyond competitive out there.
There have been movies that it's taken me 10 years to get made.
Don't wait to create. You've got to just keep making stuff.
Tune in to 4-6 Success Filmmaking for your dose of cinematic realness, direct from the voices that have lived it.
That's really interesting. You talk about the characters, each character having their own theme. Yeah, of course, like Darth Vader, right? We know when Darth Vader enters the scene, that you can just that pops. Is this common across other genres, or is this a Star Wars specific sort of thing?
No, it can be common across other films, and some composers they're very strict to leitmotivic style. Others, like Jerry Goldsmith, who wrote music for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Star Trek V, and other Next Generation movies, and wrote a great theme for Star Trek Voyager. But
I was about to say Voyager is probably my favorite Goldsmith,
and that's my favorite television theme ever. I love that. So Goldsmith's idea was to create a theme, an overall theme for the film, and maybe come up with a second motif that he might be able to use for an action sequence or a love theme. But he could usually take that one theme that he would compose and rework that into something more menacing or something more romantic or something more heroic. And so that was his idea of scoring films. Now, he only wrote a few, really thematic film scores. One was called Lionheart, which he gave every character a theme, and it's fantastic. And he's very good at it. But yeah, there's different mindsets for how you can score. And some films don't have a theme at all. I mean, it's almost impossible to find the main theme from a score by John Williams for War of the Worlds. It's just so atonal, so dissonant, so violent, so hard hitting that there really isn't that one sing-song melody that you can pick out of that score.
But I think he used horns to identify with the tripods, right? There's that.
Yes. Yeah.
I know that there's that 1.5 step up that he does with a certain chord progression that you think is the machine, the tripods, the aliens, but it's actually his horns. But that's about it, if you're right, for that one.
Right, yeah. He'll come up with little motifs that can signal something, but when you're thinking about like I said, it was like a sing-song melodies. It's something that John Williams would say that, when he's composing some of these themes, they're like songs. And, the World of Worlds really doesn't have that. Whereas, you could sing Princess Leia's theme. You can hum Darth Vader's theme right now if you wanted to, but it's really difficult to catch on to something like War of the Worlds. And there's other scores like that, like Altered States, just totally dissonant. I think there is a love theme, but it's more concentrated on creating that atmosphere rather than creating that thematic connection to a character.
Who did the score for Altered States?
John Corgliano.
Okay.
Who is a classical composer, and he's only written 4 scores his entire life. They're all fantastic. So he did Altered States, Revolution. He won the Academy Award for The Red Violin, and then he had his score rejected for Edge of Darkness, that Mel Gibson movie, and it's a fantastic score. But after that experience, he said, "I'm not doing this anymore." But he's one of the better, well-known classical composers of the 20th century. He's fantastic.
Do you guys know that movie, Altered States?
No.
William Hurt, basically, it's just a really psychedelic movie where he kind of goes into a deprivation tank multiple times to explore the human psyche. And by the end, it gets kind of ridiculous, but it's kind of a dark movie. There's divorce and family separation. But by the end, he turns into a primate in the deprivation tank and comes out, and it's wild. It's
wild.
I feel like I could picture the rental box at the video
Yeah.
store.
It is an odd cover. It is a really odd cover. I think that in have you ever seen Brainstorm? I think that
I don't
movie
think so.
and Brainstorm together would make an amazing double bill. They're both kind of like this weird out there psychedelic movies, I think released around the same time.
I
So
don't know that one.
yeah, check out Brainstorm. Oh man, the director, special effects artist, and now I can't remember his name. Douglas Trimble. He directed that one, and he only did a couple of films. And he worked with James Horner on Brainstorm, which is there's one fantastic sequence in that with what's her face from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the nurse. What's her name?
Oh, I can't think
Ratchet.
of her name.
Yeah, well, who's the actress? She was in Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. Anyway, there's a great sequence with her, and I really don't want to give it away, but when you see it, it's an incredible acting job. Really, it is. And it's also Natalie Wood's last movie. There's a bit of controversy around that. Louise Fletcher, that's who. So there's one particular scene with her in it, dialogue free, and it is incredible. And it features an incredible score by James Horner at that point, and it's essentially just viz and music, and it's painful to watch. You feel what's happening to the character, and that's a great marriage of viz and music. On a fantastic example.
So is that 1985-ish? It's around there. Isn't it?
That's 83.
83. Oh yeah. So there's another James Horner. I kind of nerded out with Adrian Tchaikovsky. When I don't know if you know Adrian or his work. He's a sci-fi author and fantasy author. He did Children of Time, which is one of the great sci-fi books of the last 10 years by far, and maybe even a couple of decades. But I mentioned something to him, and I think we were talking about just alien life forms that attracted him, and he mentioned Battle Beyond the Stars.
Yeah,
which would have been about 83, I thought, as well. But that's
it's a little earlier than that. That was back in the Roger Corman days.
Yeah,
and if you listen to that score, it is essentially everything that James Horner is about in science fiction, just in that one score. I mean, you listen to that, you can almost transplant that right into Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, which would have been within a year, I think, of release.
Yeah, so Battle Beyond the Stars was 1980, and I think that was the score that impressed Nicholas Meyer to hire Horner for Star Trek 2. He felt that was something completely different and exactly what he needed for that film.
But it also replicated John Williams's Star Wars score a little bit as well, right?
A little bit, and it also had a lot of Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the blaster beam effect that you hear that's associated with the Klingons in the opening sequence. It's a really weird sound. It's almost if you rub your hand against like a spring, but it's just this giant beast of a instrument, and he just like basically hammers it with a metal tin can, and it makes these crazy noises. And so Horner was lifting from Goldsmith for that one, and I think even John Barry used it in The Black Hole as well. It's a very unique sound.
So what are the hallmarks or like the essential pillars, in your opinion, of a great score?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because I mean, there's certain things that I like that other people might not like. But I mean, the essential first and only job really that a score should do is complement the movie. Like whatever your director wants, you essentially give it to them. And so the composer, as much as writing music is a very creative art form, I mean, you're limited to what the director wants, and you're limited to time as well. I mean, you might only have 30 seconds to write a cue that would have hundreds and hundreds of notes and hit certain specific actions that are in the scene. But I mean, you don't want to get in the way of the picture. You don't want to be annoying. And there's no real right way to write a film score. But I think that, I mean, some have said that the best film score is the one you don't notice. And that is true. You don't want it to get in the way. You want to experience the movie and everything about the movie, from the acting, the cinematography, to the sound effects, to the music, should all just blend in and create this cohesive whole. And you should have just a fantastic experience. But personally, what I like in my film scores, I love themes. I love to be able to come out of the theater and hum something. And whether that is, just one theme for a specific character, but I always love like long lined melodies. I'm also a big fan of just orchestral scores. I just find that the orchestra is really the best way of conveying emotions, because you have real people playing the instruments, and they are, offering their own emotions while they're playing. It just works brilliantly in film. But there's nothing to say that an electronic score can't do that. I get all the feels when I listen to Blade Runner. But Blade Runner, again, very melodic, very thematic. I mean, Tears and Rain. I mean, I'm sure we could all, hum that theme. And so, but yeah, I think it should. I mean, for me, when I pick like my best scores of the year, I personally like, it has to work in context. It has to do more in context. Like, it has to really elevate and lift the movie. It has to be something special. But I also feel like, and this is something that Alex North said, that a composer should also be writing for themselves as well. They should also be writing good music that can stand on its own. It's not supposed to. If it does, it's a bonus. But I think as a composer who's also writing for the film, but writing for themselves, that's the best of both worlds. And I think that kind of mindset creates the best scores, in my opinion.
Can I ask a question about, I want to play a song for you. And this one elicits, I think, lots of reactions from people in the sci-fi world. And I'd be intrigued to hear, well, actually all of your thoughts on it.
Okay.
So I'm just going to play this and tell me what you think.
Just my thoughts.
It's been a long road.
Ooh, that's a rough one, man.
Oh, let it play.
It's been a long time, but my time is finally here.
Okay, sorry. What do you think?
It did not give me the same reaction that I had when I listened to Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek Voyager. That's for sure.
Okay,
that's a very nice way to put it.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, this is the opening credits song to Star Trek Enterprise, which is the most lambasted Star Trek, I think, series out there. And for me, that's the song that I just can't not sing along to. I think it's completely divorced from the show, but I mean, it's a power ballad, right? It's this. I don't know. I'm sorry. That was my thoughts. So you don't like it? It sounds like her.
It just, man, I don't know why I have a problem with songs in Star Trek. Like Sabotage in the J.J. Abrams films bugs me. It really bugs me. And especially if you get a chance, especially when you take it away from, having a composer getting an opportunity to craft their own theme for the series. Now, I'm not all that familiar with the series, although I do know how it ends, and I know that Star Trek fans just absolutely hate that, and I get it. I'm not overly familiar with the scores as to whether they weaved that song into
not really, no.
So I don't think at all, actually.
Yeah, and so that's where when you get a chance to associate, it's much like listening to a James Bond song and then hearing that song in the score proper itself. It just elicits an emotion. It's like, hey, that's familiar. Well, what does that have to deal with? Much like No Time to Die. Hans Zimmer and Steve Mazzaro quoted David Arnold's love theme from Casino Royale, and I was like, that's just lovely. And you rarely hear that these days, because most of the time, composers just want to write their own stuff. So it was great to hear a quote of that, and I love just hearing that theme from wherever it is. And so that's why Star Trek: The Next Generation, even though it was the motion picture theme, was so powerful, and much like Deep Space Nine as well, it just all kind of like it felt like connective tissue, and that's where I felt it was just a little different, a bit too different song wise, in
but also
Enterprise.
don't leave out First Contact there, because that theme is on its own
and
as
that's
well.
magic. It's magic. Yeah. And that's another, that's a brilliant score, and good on Jonathan Frakes for bringing, Goldsmith back.
Exactly. Yeah, he really did that. And just to stick with Star Trek there, with the first J.J. Abrams, Michael Giacchino jumped in the role of composer, and I think he did a great job, especially that opening sequence. If you guys remember the opening sequence of the Star Trek reboot, where the Romulans have come through some sort of wormhole or time anomaly, and everyone dies, except for, I guess, Kirk's mother escapes with Kirk, and that's how we know he gets away. But his father dies in that attack by the Romulans, and the score there is just, I do think it is one of the best in the last couple of decades, for me at least. The theme there, Giacchino created a new Star Trek theme which fit.
Yeah, and that's playing against what you would expect in that scene. It's a huge action scene. It's massive, but Giacchino, and he's done this before. And as a side story, I do know him. I know him personally. I got to go to many of his recording sessions for his video game scores in Seattle. So,
wow.
He's a great guy. So yeah, I've known him pre Incredibles. when we found out he got that, I mean, we were just so ecstatic for him. So, but with Star Trek, I mean, he did a similar thing in Medal of Honor Frontline. There was a sequence where the town of Arnhem just absolutely gets obliterated, and it's a huge action sequence in the game. And the scores are massive. They're very John Williams adventure sounding scores. But what he wanted to do in that sequence was he wanted to play against the action and play to the emotion and what the town of Arnhem was thinking at that time. And it was so devastating. So he played this wonderful lament for the town with a solo boy voice over top of it all, and just these light strings. And it plays over this massive action sequence, and it's absolutely incredible. And Giacchino's done this before. He did it in Lost numerous times. But yeah, in Star Trek, I have never, ever cried during a Star Trek movie ever. But at that moment, when he pulled that off, and instead of writing a massive action cue, he just brings it down to the simplest emotion of a father hearing the birth of his son. And I mean, I'm not sure how many of you are dads, but that's such a powerful moment. And so we all feel that, right? And can you imagine, you're going to die within a minute, but you finally hear, your son crying, and Giacchino's playing to that. And that's the genius of Giacchino and that scene in particular. And we never had really experienced that in Star Trek. I mean, there's points where, it is very emotional, but something like that, something so very small and personal, really rare. But Giacchino is very, very good at that. And if you're familiar with his scores, he does it quite a bit, and just kind of playing against the action.
It was similar to The Lost, because it had that, the way even that Abrams used his editing back and forth, and you had that slow score with that nice, I think the piano comes up in there too, and you've got that slow rise in the strings. It was very, I remember saying, wow, I knew it was, is it Giacchino? I said Giacchino.
Yeah, Giacchino. I remember saying, how did I pronounce his name first? Giacchino. Giacchino. Anyway, I gave him a tape of my radio show once, and he says, no, it's Giacchino, and I never forgot it.
Okay. I won't forget. Yeah. But I remember thinking, wow, this sounds like Lost. And Lost was one of the first science fiction shows to have a complete live score of an actual string score that took it all the way through the show, I believe.
It was rare at that time. It was. If you think back to the 80s, they all kind of had maybe about 20 to 30 players, but there were points where within Lost, he was bringing in 60, 70 players, and that's not cheap. And on top of that, you're using LA musicians as well, and they aren't cheap either. And so, but J.J. Abrams was all about that. I mean, when he heard Medal of Honor, he literally emailed Giacchino up and said, do you want to work on my TV show? And Giacchino thought that was a joke. And so that was for Alias. And so he wrote music for Alias, then he eventually went on to Lost. And of course, those two have been working together ever since, with the exception of Star Wars. But I mean, Giacchino does a very similar thing in Rogue One, where he just strips everything away and just uses like airy string and piano when the two Star Destroyers crash together and crash onto the planet, and Jin and they're about to die and all that sort of stuff, and it's all the emotion first, and he just kind of slows everything down instead of creating something overly big, and which some composers would do. So yeah, he's very good at that.
You guys mentioned this theme song, and just for the sake of our audience, let's just play it, and then maybe we can talk about it. First of all, you know what theme we're talking about here?
Mm-hmm.
This is Star Trek Voyager, just for anybody who doesn't know. And if I could just point out, in my own very non-knowledgeable sense here, it just sounds more fitting to a space opera, doesn't it? Doesn't that, like, even compared to, I mean, the one I just played for Enterprise, just sounds good.
Can you continue that though? Because you just missed when the chord rises, yet the theme stays consistent.
All right,
keep going.
Kevin will shut up and press play.
That was a good idea, Kevin. Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. I do really like that one too. I much prefer that to the Enterprise one.
Yeah.
And even Next Generation. I mean, Next Generation is exciting, but it's not beautiful. The Voyager's beautiful.
Yeah, and it fits. It fits the visuals. I mean, you got this new spaceship that just is slowly flying through these alien worlds that they have never visited before. But it's just such a slow moving intro, and Jerry Goldsmith is just signifying the absolute power of this ship, but also the beauty of space. And if you just listen to it, it is very stripped down and simple. None of the instruments are getting in the way. Everything's complemented. And, even when the strings come in, but you have that massive horn section just playing that theme, those huge timpanis pounding away. It is absolutely gorgeous. And I remember exactly where I was the day that I saw that. And I'm like, this is absolute magic. And he was actually supposed to write the theme for Deep Space Nine, but didn't get a chance to. So that went to Dennis McCarthy. But that would have been interesting as well. But Goldsmith always wanted to write a brand new theme for the TV Trek, and I'm glad he got a chance on Voyager.
So I've got and this is again an amateur question, but do you have like a top? Is it possible to have a top 3 scores? I mean, does Raiders still hold up for you?
Yep. Yeah, it's Raiders, Empire Strikes Back, and Back to the Future. Although if you go to my website and you see my favorite scores of all time show, it's changed a bit. It used to be Cutthroat Island at number 3. It's kind of dropped down a bit. I put Back to the Future up a little higher. Oh, wow. So that's the 80s for you. That's when I grew up, and that all still just sticks. There's some older scores in that list. I mean, there's an obscure swashbuckler called Prince Valiant, which I absolutely love, and it's one of the earliest comic book movies that came out in 1954. The Seahawk, love that. Or Signs is I think the newest score on my list. I don't think anything passes that date. Dances with Wolves.
Oh yeah, John Barry.
Yeah. And I would put I put a video game score on my favorite list. So I put Giacchino's Medal of Honor in there, which I think is a masterpiece. And I'm sure I'm missing another one. But yeah, it's Raiders, Empire, and Back to the Future. Now I'm being fair that way because I probably put Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in there as well, which I think is brilliant. Just absolutely brilliant. But yeah, John Williams is at the top for sure.
And just to home in on Back to the Future there, if you think about that film as a science fiction, it's in some ways light on the science fiction. It's just, and it's almost more comedic, but there's no special effects. There's special effects when you travel through time, and that is it. So there was very little action, but there was a lot of running around and suspense in that way. But that film would not be what it is today, I believe, without Alan Silvestri's score, because if you listen to that Back to the Future score, it is gigantic. It's huge. The amount of musicians, it's huge.
It is pretty iconic, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's huge and it's fast, and that's what keeps us going with the just looking out the window and seeing the bad guys. You've got the biggest orchestra going on that makes the action more intense, even though it's kind of light.
There's an interesting story behind Silvestri's career, also the creation of that score. I mean, listening to it, you think that Alan Silvestri had been writing and studying symphonic music his entire life. But it was only until 1985 that he finally wrote his first symphonic score, and it was for a film called Fandango the same year. And then he wrote Back to the Future. Steven Spielberg didn't think he could get it done. And that makes sense because if you go back a couple of years, the first score he wrote for Robert Zemeckis was Romancing the Stone. Very electronic. But Silvestri is a guitar guy. He's a jazz guy. He's a rock guy. You know, he wrote a lot of music for the TV show Chips. But there's nothing in his canon up to that point that would signify that he could write a score like Back to the Future. And what's interesting, and we didn't know this until Intrada Records released the actual score itself, and I think that was back in 2011. That was the first time the score in its complete form had ever been released, because there was only that one album with all the songs. And I mean, that's another thing that we should talk about because, the songs and score work so well together. They're all iconic. And rarely does that happen. I find sometimes songs get in the way of a score, and where a score could work better on the song. But I mean, everything musically in that film is fantastic. But the early score that Silvestri wrote was almost rejected by Steven Spielberg. He's like, this isn't good enough. And you can actually listen to that early score on the second disc of the first press of that album back in 2011. And it is similar, but also vastly different. And there's a lot more electronics in it. The orchestrations aren't as clean and clear as they eventually became. But it's interesting to listen to the development of that score and how many of the cues were redone, not essentially rewritten, but they became fuller in their final version. But what I also think is fantastic about, I mean, it's such a well spotted score as well. And if you're not familiar with the term spotting, it's just this, it's a meeting that the director, producers, and composers have, and you go in and you're like, hey, I want music here, I want music there, I want music here, music there. So Silvestri's music actually doesn't come in until I think about the 17 or 18 minute mark of that movie. So it's all songs or dialogue, and it comes at the best time. And it's at the reveal of the DeLorean at the Twin Pines Mall. And what's also unique about that is that Zemeckis made the decision not to open the main title where you see Back to the Future with Silvestri's fanfare, which he actually wrote. He wrote the big Back to the Future theme fanfare for that 20-second bit, but he pulled that out instead of had the ticking clocks over top of the main title. So you had no idea what the score sounded like. You had no idea what the feel was going to be. But what I mean, back when I was a kid watching movies of this sort, whether it's The Last Starfighter or Goonies or The Explorers, I always felt that when I'm watching these films and I heard an orchestral score, for some reason I had to take it more serious, that it felt more dramatic. It felt more real to me, that, everything that you were going to see just had more stakes. And I don't know why I felt that. I felt that way about Die Hard. I mean, if you release Die Hard in these days, this time, you probably wouldn't have a score like Michael Kamen's, which is just absolutely massive, huge orchestral score. It would not sound like that today. So I love the fact that you can have this teen comedy with a bit of sci-fi in it, yet still have a 90-piece orchestra playing the score. And then, of course, you got the clock tower sequence. I mean, can you imagine that with any other score? It's 10 minutes of just utter brilliance. And again, if you take the time, go back to it and just listen to it and listen to the music specifically on how he hits particular sync points, like specific actions on screen. It's masterful. I could not be a composer because it's mathematical and I suck at math. So, but the fact that they can hit certain elements at a specific time, and it goes down to the millisecond, while they're conducting and doing all that, I think composers are brilliant and genius. And I think that watching that whole sequence, I can't believe that they got it done, and they got it done so well. And it wouldn't have worked without it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Michael Kamen. What's his best score? I hope you say the right. My
favorite is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
That's what I wanted to hear, and that's one of my favorite scores. It's one of a kind.
That's a generational score. It's something that it's like one of those scores that turns people on who aren't film score fans. I think if you hear the overture from that, and you had no idea what film scores were, that would just turn you on instantly. It is marvelous. But I mean,
one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Who are the composers that you would recommend for someone who's just sort of new to it and getting into into movie scores and is wondering who to download or find at the used record store?
Yeah, that's a very personal decision, not necessarily on my part, but to kind of figure out what you're all about. What do you like? What type of music do you like? What do you like listening to? Then I can make a recommendation based on that. But I do have, I made this like mixed CD when we were used to listen to CDs. That was basically the history of the film score. So you would get an idea of just about anything and everything, from, let's say, the Seahawk to Spartacus, very complex music, to something like Taken to the Pelham 1, 2, 3, which contains a very, very unique score written in a very, very unique style, through Star Wars and Batman and Dance with Wolves. But then I throw Vangelis in there for Blade Runner or 1492 Conquest of Paradise. So I would try to introduce you to as many different styles as possible, and that's almost impossible to do like on a 7-minute CD. But again, it's trying to figure out who you are and what you like. It's like, do you know what Star Wars is? And if you don't, then what are your favorite movies? That's sort of where I would start and go, okay, well, do you like the music in that movie? And some people don't even realize, again, like I said, they don't even realize that there's like 70, 80, 90 minutes of music in their favorite movies. And so, but I always love that's the whole point of my radio show. That was when I began. It was to introduce this art form that I love to people who have never heard it before. So I would play the favorites, but I also play the new stuff or some of the more obscure stuff. I just wanted you to fall in love with all of it. And that's my main goal. And still my goal to this day. to hopefully introduce somebody to something new that they would go out and buy it and enjoy it.
Well, where can our listeners find you?
Wow, I'm all over the place. I mostly hang out on Twitter, so that's fun. Sin Sound Radio, that's an easy place to find me. But if you want to listen to the show, it's at cinematicsound.net. And earlier Tristan mentioned there's I think there's 10 different shows now, all different types of styles. So, like I said, if you want obscure scores, like just stuff that you would not realize had like Cool as Ice, that Vanilla Ice movie has the score. And my friend Rob found it and played it on the show. It's not great, but it's like, wow, that had music. Cool. I get to listen to it. So, but there's, you like video games. I got a guy doing a video game show. You like anime? I got anime. You want to do deep dives into specific film scores? Like we did one on Jurassic Park or Aliens, Waterworld. Like we take 2 hours and just talk about that film and that score. So if you like that sort of deep dive stuff, that's fun. If you're a composer yourself or you like dabbling in music, David Casina, who's my composer, who writes all the intro music for me, he has interviewed, I think, about 3 composers or people in the industry. And those are a little more deep dives for musicians. Jason Drury, who lives in England, he does 2 shows focusing on older scores. But he's also now interviewing. He's got his lineup of interviews. It's insane. So, he's just recently talked to Brian Tyler. So you might know him from Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World. The Fast and the Furious series. So yeah, there's if you love film music, you love film. I mean, even just like movies and you wanted to explore this other side to it, there's something there. And I do whatever I want to do. It's my show. So, but yeah, the best thing that I've done recently was that 6-part John Williams series. I love that. I loved working on that one. Talking about my favorite composer, but listening back to those episodes, I'm really proud of that show. And I think, if you just want to kind of listen to John Williams from, his beginnings in the 60s all the way straight through to Rise of Skywalker, you might enjoy that.
So do you play the scores on your show and then talk about them? Yeah.
It's, again, going back to when I started the show, I didn't want to just create another music program. I didn't want to just sit there and play music all day and maybe say the name of the film and the track. My goal was to let you know what was happening. I wanted to tell you exactly every single moment that's happening, let's say in the asteroid field from The Empire Strikes Back, and where Williams's theme's going to pop in, and why does it sound so comedic here, and why eventually do we hear the Han Solo and the Princess Leia theme at the end of the track. So I analyze the score itself musically the best that I can, also in context, and then I just kind of tell you why I like it. And then of course I give you the music, so then you can finally hear it and then make the judgment yourself whether you like it or whether what I said made any sense. So yeah, I go into a lot of detail, a lot of research, a lot of my scripts. I do 90-minute to 2-hour shows. I'm writing 3,000 to 4,000 words of script. That takes a lot of time, but I feel it's worth it. But that's what I started. That's how I started. I couldn't do it any other way. And but it's the type of show I wanted to listen to when I was a kid. I was like, if there was a film music show out, I want people telling me why they're playing. Even any radio show, don't just tell me why you're playing. Like, even if it's a pop station, why you're playing Taylor Swift. It's like, tell me about the song. When did she write it? Why did she write it? That interests me. I love shows like that. And that's why I listen to like community radio, where they'll do that. They're allowed to do that. And there are other shows where you can get real deep cuts and people will talk about the music and then play it. That interests me. And that's the type of show I wanted to present back in 96.
Awesome. Is Harry and the Hendersons a good soundtrack or a balanced soundtrack?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Yeah. It's kind of like this,
good.
This
to verify that.
Yeah, it's a quasi classical score written by a great guy named Bruce Broughton. He wrote Silverado, Tombstone, that crappy Lost in Space movie. But he's a fantastic. He was actually supposed to write the score for Home Alone, but decided to pick The Rescuers Down Under instead.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And then John
so-
Williams picked that up, right?
And there you go. Can you imagine a
Yeah,
world
not having
without
the-
somewhere in my memory? I can't.
Dun-dun-dun-dun.
Yeah. So it's amazing how things work out. Much like Jerry Goldsmith was supposed to write the score to Superman. But a scheduling conflict, happened. And so Richard Donner picked John Williams instead. Again, can you imagine Superman the movie without that theme? I'm sure Goldsmith would have done a great job. I mean, he even got a chance to write a score for a similar movie, Supergirl. It's a pretty crappy film, but he got to write that superhero score that he always wanted to. But yeah, it's interesting to. I mean, that's what I love. I love, there's even rejected scores. There's so many incredible scores that have been written and then just taken right out, and somebody has about 16 days to write a brand new score. It's all fascinating. And there's record labels that will even release those scores as well. So it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know who we haven't talked about yet, and we should, is
How you guys doing?
pretty good. Hey, baby. But there's an iconic piece right there, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. It's that's like one of my favorites of all time. And I don't know if you guys, City TV used to play Blade Runner every midnight after New Year's. That's where I saw it every New Year's. Yeah. So, they'd have their little New Year's celebration, and then all of a sudden Blade Runner was on, and I watched it every single year. But yeah,
and that's Vangelis, correct? That's not the Tangerine
Vangelis,
Dream.
Yeah, it's not
or
Tangerine
Vangelis.
Dream. Yeah,
that's.
I mean, when you talk about revolutionary scores, I mean, a year earlier he does Chariots of Fire, which just blew up, absolutely blew up. He won the Oscar for that one. And then, gets to do Blade Runner, and it's a masterpiece. And I just recently rewatched the film last week. It's mesmerizing. So good. So good. And then again, we were talking about melody. That's just a fantastic melody right there. One of the rare organic pieces, the real saxophone, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And there's so many other great scores. Like I said, 1492 is one that just completely goes against what you would think you would hear in a film of that sort. The Christopher Columbus movie by Ridley Scott. Would you expect to hear this electronic score? And
who did the score there?
So Vangelis did.
Really?
1492 Conquest of Paradise.
Oh.
And it's fantastic. It's fantastic. It just fits. Now, years later, he does Alexander with Ridley Scott, and it doesn't work at all. So sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, but Blade Runner is fantastic. It's a masterpiece.
And I think a lot of credit goes to Hans Zimmer for not trying to recreate Blade Runner and really taking Vangelis and what he did and incorporating that into the soundtrack. Because I love Blade Runner 2049, maybe even a little bit more than the original. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but it might be true.
Scandal.
It's an interesting extension of that music. And most of that was actually written by Benjamin Wallfish. He gets co-credit. The reason is Hans Zimmer was on tour at that time, so he was doing his film music tour, and I think he was out in Europe at that time. And so before he left, he and Benjamin Wallfish had maybe a couple of days to go over a few ideas. But once Hans took off, Wallfish was working on it, and then at the end of the tour, Zimmer came back, and I think for about a week they just kind of tweaked things. But that's mostly a Benjamin Wallfish score. But that was supposed to be written by Johan Johansson, who wrote the score for Arrival, Denis Villeneuve's Arrival.
Yeah.
Now, the rumors have it that Johansson wasn't writing a score that was close enough to Vangelis. He was doing his own thing, which is what he does. So he was eventually rejected. And I think Johansson had worked with Villeneuve on a bunch of movies, including Sicario, which got an Academy Award nomination. So really weird to see that rejection happen. But now like Hans Zimmer and Villeneuve are inseparable. Yeah, Dune I think is brilliant. So
my first pass on Dune was almost a little bit disappointing because I didn't hear a theme and I was like, well, where's my theme? Where's my melody? Right. But then revisiting, I'm really seeing like obviously heavy in the percussion, and a great score for that film.
Yeah, I experienced it first with, I'm not sure if you have, there's the sketchbook, which is the ideas that Zimmer, he's doing this all the time now. He'll release all of his ideas and rough cuts and anything that comes to his mind while he's in the process of actually writing a score. So he released the sketchbook, which I think has more of the thematic ideas that you're looking for, which were then integrated into the score proper. And I think it also has that end credit cue that isn't on the original soundtrack. So it's really weird. But I was extremely annoyed by it. I didn't get it until I saw the movie, and I was just blown away by how right it was. Everything was perfect about that. And then I listened to that score for about 2 straight weeks, and that rarely happens. I think the last time I did that was maybe like How to Train Your Dragon and Tron Legacy, where I was just listening to these things back to back to back to back. Even like the Matrix Reloaded, I think, was one that I just listened to constantly. So it rarely happens, but Dune was just repeat. Let's go. Let's do it again. I loved it. Yeah. I loved every moment of that.
I've actually done the new Matrix movie a few times, and I kind of like the remixes.
Yeah, the remixes are really good. Yeah. For us film score nerds, we were extremely disappointed that Don Davis wasn't brought back. But I mean,
yeah. But Twicker, he's really good. He like Cloud Atlas, I think, was an amazing set. That's an amazing accomplishment. He directed a third of this film, kind of, but then did the score. That Cloud Atlas is one of my favorite scores, I think, of all time. It's
really good. It's really good. Sense 8, I think, was the other one they were working on, and I think that comes close to the Matrix sound. But Don Davis was doing something. I mean, it's like replacing John Williams on Star Wars. Don Davis brought together a unique sensibility, a unique style of music that it's the minimalist style of music. So if you listen to anything by a guy named John Adams, you'll hear where the roots of the Matrix is, or where it came from. And so that's what makes the Matrix scores so unique. And so like nobody had written a score like the Matrix, and even Reloaded and Revolutions. Nobody had written music like that, but that relationship blew up. And that's kind of why Davis wasn't on Speed Racer. They basically blew everything up. The Wachowskis just wanted to work with a whole bunch of new people. And so that's how Giacchino got Speed Racer and Jupiter Ascending. So, and Don Davis just went on working on his opera. He's worked on only a few scores since The Matrix.
Yeah, not many.
Really sad.
Well, one of the most obscure soundtracks from someone that I cannot name. I don't even know this fella's work. I just know his iconic theme music for Terminator 2, Judgment Day.
Brad Fiedel.
Where did that come from? Did he write that for the movie, or did James Cameron hear that and say, I want that in my movie? Like, how did that happen? Because it's a synthetic, it's all synth.
Yep. It's basically
it's all, like, how?
Yeah. Fidel's working, I think, out of his bedroom or his garage on his own gear. So I'll tell you afterwards, there's a great video you should go see, and it is the creation of the Terminator 2 score. Fascinating on how he would took samples of organic instruments and would pitch them down to create that, that kind of throbbing horn sound you hear in Terminator 2 for the T-1000. That well, that's a trumpet, an actual trumpet itself, just pitched way the heck down. Really? And him playing it on this keyboard, and it's through just this archaic computer system that he has, and I'm surprised he got anything done. So yeah, the first one definitely sounds very different than the second one. The second one is a bit more sophisticated, but he's still working on some really early computer equipment. But I think those two scores are brilliant, are absolutely brilliant, including that theme.
Can I play it just so people can hear
anything you want? Throw on there, Kevin. That's great.
Okay.
Like it doesn't sound like one of the biggest grossing films of all the time. You know, it kind of just
Right.
has a B movie-ish sound in a way, or just something kind of. It doesn't sound like a James Cameron movie, considering what James Cameron's done in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and he has. I mean, he really does like electronics. That's for sure. If you listen to maybe the first half of The Abyss, up until the point where we finally see the aliens, where she finally actually touches the alien who kind of flies over top of her in The Abyss. That's the first time we really hear something, symphonic. Although you kind of hear you hear a symphony sort of sound during the main title and some militaristic drums, but there's a lot of electronics, especially when they're visiting I think it's the Montana sub that had crashed. All very textural and electronic. And then even Titanic, which is actually, that's a whole other story. I mean, when you go back to Aliens,
he wanted Enya to do Titanic, didn't he?
Exactly. And so, which is weird that he eventually got to James Horner, because James Horner and James Cameron pretty much came to blows on Aliens. It was an insane process for them, because Horner, I think, arrived about 6 weeks before the recording sessions in London and had no film to write to. The film was just being cut up and spit out, constantly every day. It was changing. He'd write music, and then here's a new scene. I mean, there's a point where, and the legend has it that if you know the cue, it's called Bishop's Countdown. It's when the planet finally explodes. It's a piece that is heard in millions of trailers. The rumor has it he wrote that overnight, and it's one of the most iconic pieces of film music, ever. So, but that one's interesting because most of that is symphonic, and that Aliens comes off of Terminator, which is really, really interesting. But yeah, then he went to Abyss again. Silvestri works in electronics, but also, I mean, that's a huge orchestral score when you get to the end of the movie. Terminator 2 goes back to Fidel. True Lies is Fidel as well, but he's working with Shirley Walker, who had worked with Danny Elfman, orchestrated such scores as Batman. She also worked with Hans Zimmer on a few scores like Backdraft and A League of Their Own. So that's Fidel, but he sounds different. It's electronic with symphonic music. But then when you get to Titanic, I mean, I'm shocked that Horner was asked. I mean, you're right. Enya was most definitely the temp track. You can hear it. And that's why the choir stays synthetic. Horner even got an argument with the recording engineer, Sean Murphy, over recording the choir live. It was supposed to be a live choir, but it was that Enya sounding choir. So, but the fact that Horner and Cameron kissed and made up is really interesting, because that relationship was just going nowhere fast. And then, of course, they do Avatar, which is brilliant as well.
Well, I would say so. James Horner is one of my favorites, but when I think of sci-fi, it's limited. There's Aliens and Avatar, Battle Beyond the Stars. We've named a couple more, I think.
Yeah,
but
Brainstorm.
Right.
Would you call Krull sci-fi, or is that more fantasy?
Oh yeah, that's sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's sci-fi fantasy. It doesn't. In fact, it's almost comedy, we could say. But I do love Krull. And that's also 83. Like, he had a little cluster of those sci-fi adventures, right?
Incredible.
But Avatar stands out because it's so beautiful, but then also loud and action-packed. But James Horner, I mean, not to get too much away from sci-fi, but Braveheart, Legends of the Fall, Titanic, all those 90s tunes that we've all heard many times, that's all James Horner, and he's one of the best. But he passed away in 2013, I believe, or right around then.
It was 2015, yeah.
It was a plane crash. And I mean, he was not old. He had a lot more in him, and it's I was very sad to hear of his passing. Considering it's not like an actor passing for myself. It's someone who gave me a lot of emotional feels with his music. So I'm still disappointed we won't hear much, and I'm not sure who's going to continue with Avatar for the soundtracks. But
it's Simon Franklin, who did a lot of the electronic music for or programming for James Horner on Avatar, and he's worked with Horner before. So when James Horner died, he had already submitted a few themes to I forgot the director of the remake of the Magnificent Seven, but that he had gifted these themes to the director, and the director's like, well, these are great, so I'm definitely going to make the movie. He made the movie based on the music that Horner had given it to him, but Horner had died. So Simon Franklin, who did some orchestrations and electronic work for him, had a team basically take the themes that Horner wrote and put them all together and wrote a score essentially in James Horner's style, and every kind of James Horner-ism is in the Magnificent Seven. So it's a lovely tribute to him. So Simon Franklin has he's working on a couple of other scores, but the key thing, and the reason why I think he got the job, is that he adapted music for the Avatar, the Pandora world at Walt Disney World. So he did all the music for that area, including the flight through Pandora, which is fantastic. It's one of my favorite rides I've ever been on. And so that's one of the reasons why Franklin got it. So it's a big project.
Walking through a dream, I see you.
What's the song?
That's the song from the end, yeah.
Breathing hope of new life. Now I live through you and you through.
Gonna make me cry, dude. Taking me back to 2009, seeing that movie in 3D, and it blowing my mind.
Yes,
unbelievable. They still haven't touched it when it comes to 3D. So
I think the other one that made me almost barf was Gravity. That's the other 3D one that I thought worked brilliantly, but I hate 3D. I can't stand it. But you're right, Avatar was fantastic. When they had those little jellyfish things kind of flying around in the air, and all you want to do is just reach out. And so, Cameron is all up in this 3D technology. So if you ever get a chance, going down to Walt Disney World, visit Pandora, ride Flight Through Pandora. It is one of the most insane 3D rides you'll ever be on. You really feel like you're actually on one of those flying dinosaurs. Like to the point where, like, when we went, which is about 5 years ago, my son was he's like 8 or 9. Now, when you're sitting on the chair, it's actually supposed to be one of those flying things, and it breathes in and out. And so there's a point where about halfway through the ride, we kind of just stop and you kind of take a look around. He thought it was so real. He's like, "It's okay, boy. It's okay. We're going to be good." So he's actually talking to his seat. And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're so into this." But it makes you feel like you're actually flying, doing 360s and loop-de-loops. I came off of it just sweating as if I've been on a real roller coaster. But it's got all the sounds, the smells, and just this huge score, and you just feel like you've been transported in the movie. So I really can't wait for the next, what is it, 3 movies that are coming out?
Yeah, 3 or 4. I think.
Yeah, Cameron he's so good with technology, and so I'm really hoping that this works out.
Yeah, he's a bit of an inventor, isn't he?
Yes.
Explorer.
Mm-hmm. What kind of like sticks with you when like, what's the science fiction movie or maybe music that you guys have heard that kind of resonated with you?
It's been a long road.
Just end the show right there. You've won the internet.
Well, I know Sam is a big Star Wars and Indiana Jones fan.
Nice.
Like
yeah. I missed the soundtracks of the 80s. Like that, though, that to me made it an event, like made going to the cinema an event. Part of that, and the soundtracks were sort of a character of those films. For me, I think of definitely Star Wars, and you brought up Voyager. Actually, I quite like Voyager, but I think of like Star Wars for sure. Back to the Future, when you brought those up, it's funny. It takes someone else to sort of bring those up, and then Kevin playing a piece of that. It's like, oh yeah, like that was awesome, and that did make it big, and that was a big part of my childhood, right? So I kind of gravitate towards those sort of big orchestral 80s feel. If it can make me feel like I'm watching E.T. again for the first time, or any Star Wars film, or Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I watched on video disc. And I remember, it just sort of these things come back to me, and it was all such a huge, just felt big, particularly to my still vibrant, like inner 12-year-old who's like game for it. So I think that's sort of where I gravitate towards, but it's something that I've still felt disconnected to. So coming into this conversation has been really interesting to sort of get a dive in, and also kind of open my eyes a little wider as to what was sitting in front of me the whole time. And I think that's the great thing about what we can do here with this show, is we can still feel like we're geeking out and to discover something new and go to a new place. So this has been a really great conversation for me. And now I'm going to be rewatching these old, because I'll watch all these old films again, and we're watching them in a completely different light now.
Well, Erik, thank you so much. Like I said, we're not done here. We'll connect with you again sometime. And
awesome.
And thanks for your time and your knowledge and enthusiasm. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great to meet you, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great to meet you guys. It was my pleasure. And I hope we get to do it again. And thanks again.
And beers and pinball in your future.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
nuggets.
absolutely. Beers and yes, let's do it. Totally.
Thank you so much for joining us, Erik. That was a great time. If you like listening to film scores and talking about it, or hearing people talk about it, check out cinematicsound.net. You won't be disappointed. All right, next week, the one and only John Scalzi. He's hilarious. So much fun to hang out with. He's on the show next week, so watch for that one. Until next time.